Hello boys and girls, friends old and new from near and far, welcome back to the channel. The Holy Trinity. I'm not a religious man, but I like watches, and the Holy Trinity of watches includes this brand, Vacheron Constantin. We're looking at a 1961 ultra slim dress watch, made possible by the very slim caliber 1001. This is the /1 version with the sub-seconds. You see the crystal is missing, but the watch is running and the handset works. You can see how slim this watch is. Of course the crystal will add a little bit. Looking at the time grapher, we see it's actually pretty good. It just needs a service. So let's get to it. The dial is actually in pretty good condition. It looks a lot better to the naked eye than the video can really show. It has one really visible flaw, this sort of corrosion spot at 10 o'clock. But apart from that, it's nothing major. Solid 18K gold case. Since the crystal is missing, we're just gonna put a replacement crystal on top so we can get the movement out of the case. And look at this. Looks all right. So why are we talking about the Holy Trinity? Of course, that could be viewed as a little bit sacrilegious. It is, after all, a biblical term. But in terms of watches, it refers to Vacheron Constantin, Patek Philippe, and Audemars Piguet. And the main reason that these are called the Holy Trinity is that they are quite spectacular, and not only the prices. They're spectacular for their rich history, for their fantastic quality, for the complications, but perhaps most of all for the finish. We'll talk about that a bit more for this specific movement. But Vacheron was actually founded back in 1755. So for the Americans among us, that was 21 years before the US was founded. Became Vacheron Constantin in the early 1800s. And still Patek and Audemars was not founded yet. So it has almost 100 years ahead of the other two. Currently, Vacheron is the top dog in the Richemont group. Did I just say Richemont group? Yeah, I did. Well, Richemont group. Of course, we already talked a little bit about the Richemont before, with IWC being one of the top brands as well, but still in a bit different league. Richemont also includes Jaeger-LeCoultre, which has had a quite tight bond to Vacheron over the times. Actually, this specific movement is more or less the same as Jaeger-LeCoultre 818. And when I say more or less, it's probably less. It's a little bit like a Maserati shares a platform with a Fiat. And yes, Jaeger-LeCoultre being talked of as a Fiat, that sort of tells you the quality level we're talking about with Vacheron. In Swiss watchmaking, one of the highest quality stamps you can have is the Geneva seal. It is literally a stamp stamped onto the bridges of the watch. If you look closely, you can see it on the train wheel bridge at around 3 o'clock in this picture. It is the city crest of Geneva. To be able to stamp this on the watches, the company has to have the headquarters in Geneva, and you have to fulfill criteria of 12 different aspects of watchmaking. Prime among them are the finishing, and we're going to see a little bit more detail later, but you can already see that the finishing of this watch is good. So as you've seen, while we've been talking about other things, we took off the balance and the pallet fork. This watch has a standard balance, if you will. They also came with a free-sprung Gyromax balance, so a Patek Philippe patent. Something they also use extensively today. So as we take off some of these parts, we're going to have a look at the underside as well. It's difficult to see here, but the escape wheel is beautifully chamfered on the underside. Oh, don't scratch it. When working on this kind of watches, you really don't want to scratch them. So that is a good argument for actually using a piece of pegwood instead of a screwdriver to pry off the bridges. Okay, let's stop it right there. Look at the finishing on the underside of the train bridge. They have a beautiful perlage. Somewhere no one is ever going to see it, apart from the watchmaker. And you may ask yourself, why? And there is, of course, no real good answer to that. It's just a thing that really sets these brands apart. That everything is hand finished to the highest degree. Let's take off the bar bridge as well. It's very busily engraved, trying to fit in all the different positions they've been testing this watch in, and for heat and what have you. Also look at this finish with a hidden crown wheel. And of course the underside of the barrel is also beautifully perlaged. Going to the dial side, the keyless works is very straightforward. But the finish again is just something different. That really is the main theme of this video. The watch itself is of course very uncomplicated. Doesn't even have automatic winding. And it only shows the time. But the way it does it is something different. And you don't see a lot of videos of the Holy Trinity being serviced, so hopefully this is something nice to see as well. And if the channel gets enough subscribers, who knows, maybe we'll do a Patek Philippe Grand Complication next. Or not. Maybe we'll do a Psycho next. Not to say that Psycho is not a good brand, but finishing wise it's on a slightly different level than this. And for those of you having watched a few videos, you know that I do love Psycho, so. Alright, we gotten most stuff off. Let's just take out the setting lever screw. We can take out the stem and the winding and sliding pinion. Now we can put the balance back on, take out the shock settings so that the watch is ready for the cleaner. So this watch uses these K1001 shock settings for the balance wheel. Not sure if they were chosen for their likeness to the Maltese cross, but they do fit well. Alright, let's take off the crown wheel as well. And we're going to take out the mainspring. We remember that the amplitude was a bit low, so we'll probably have to change the mainspring. So let's say you want one, a Vacheron. How much would you have to pay for it? Well, the cheapest one's new, hand-wound patrimony, probably around 15,000 euros, $25,000. But you can get vintage ones for probably around 4,000 or 5,000 for a good one. You have to really watch out though. There's a lot of redials out there, and of course you always want to see pictures of the movement. And if you want to service a watch like this yourself, it's not black magic. As you've seen, this caliber is very straightforward. This caliber is also one of the more common ones. The 1001 caliber was really seen as quite possibly the best hand-wound caliber at the time. Duking it out with Patek Philippe. Now that we got the movement ready for the cleaning machine, we can have a look at the case. You see that the bezel, somehow there's glue there. So at some point there's been crystal that's been glued to the bezel. So we're going to take the glue away, and we're going to find the crystal that fits. And let's also peg out the stem opening in the case a bit. Alright, let's bring out the soap. Alright, so let's have a closer look now that we got all the ketchup off. See the setting lever spring, the hand finished chamfer, same thing on the pallet fork. See the underside of the different bridges. Of course, serves absolutely no practical purpose to do this level of finishing on the underside of a bridge. But it does look pretty nice for us lucky people who get to see it. There we have the barrel bridge. The owner of a watch like this basically would never see this. There's basically no space on a watch like this that has not been finished to the highest level. And that makes it pretty cool to see, to work on. We're gonna allow ourselves just a little bit more finishing porn. All right, I think that's enough. Let's get back to reality. Let's rip off the band-aid. Let's tear off the blindfold. Let's take a really cold shower. Yeah, that's unfortunately more of the finish we're used to. For now, let's still savor the Vacheron. So we got a new mainspring. See, even the inside of the barrel is beautifully decorated. It's kind of silly, you know, that it's so nice everywhere. Oh, hang on. Sounds like my colleague is still working on that quartz. Hey buddy, how's that Casio going? I'm working on a Vacheron, man. Sorry, can't hear you, man. Oh, sorry about that, I guess. Kind of cruel and unusual treatment, I suppose, to compare a Casio to a Vacheron. That said, the Casio is probably more accurate. So if you're looking for something that keeps time perfectly, you're probably better off with a $10 Casio than a $10,000 Vacheron. But keeping time is not really what wristwatches are for anymore, right? Time is all around us. There used to be a saying that if you have one clock in your house, you know the time. If you have two, you're never really sure. And nowadays you have probably a handful of devices showing you the time in your house. And the least accurate would be a mechanical wristwatch. You have your phones, you have your tablet, your computer, your TV, your stove, your fridge, anything. And they're all gazillions of times more accurate than a wristwatch, apart from a Casio. And that's really the core explanation as to why timepieces such as this one are so highly regarded. Because it isn't really about time, it's about craftsmanship. It's about the love of perfection. It's about something that pushes the limits of what human hands are capable of forming. It's about attention to detail that just isn't part of our modern world anymore. The world today is much more of a place where you do what you can within the time frame you have. You do what's possible as good as you can, and then you jump on to the next thing. Everyone's connected 24/7 and everything is stressed, right? It's like you feel it's a waste of time to watch a movie on a weekday. And that characteristic of modern society is, I think, what really makes these timepieces so unique. That they're basically wasting so much time and energy and effort in decorating the bottom of the barrel, literally. But that waste is luxury. It's the highest luxury I think we have in our modern world, is that of wasting time. All right, we turned very philosophical there for a while. I almost made myself cry. In the meantime, we got the barrel back in. We oiled the barrel arbor. I'm going to put on the ratchet wheel and already put in the setting lever screws, so we can now put on the barrel bridge. First though, let's get the crown wheel on. We oil the post with some HP 1300. And we make sure to put a tiny little drop of oil wherever metal rubs against metal. One thing when we're working on the movements, we never want to leave any marks. That's why we also shouldn't use the tips of our tweezers that much when we're pressing things down, for instance. And again, probably even more ideal would be to use pegwood, at least until you feel comfortable that you're not scratching things with your tweezers. Probably even after that, to be honest. So now we can start putting the wheel train in. Another testament to the high quality of this movement, it's not all about finish, is that the pieces just fall into place very nicely and easily. We don't have to spend a lot of time massaging the pivots into the holes, the wheels just kind of drop into place. We see the wheel train runs very nicely and freely. In a lot of ways, the movement is reminiscent of other hand wounds from the period. Of course, the IWC-89 comes to mind, but also movements like the Longines 30L, for instance. And as mentioned, the Jaeger-LeCoultre 818 is more or less the same movement, just a bit less refined and a bit less adjusted. And this right here, seeing the wheels run like that, I think that's what just very fascinating to a lot of people. My son, who's almost 8, is already interested in this kind of stuff, and he really loves to make the wheels spin. I think it's a little bit the chain reaction part, that you put energy into one place and it transfers all the way to the end. Alright, so we fix or drop the pallet fork. And we're almost ready to start testing the movement. We of course know that it did run well already. Just needed to get some ketchup off, and then we should be good. Okay, let's turn the movement over. We'll start this time with a cannon pinion. As mentioned, the keyless works is pretty straightforward. The only thing that can be different is exactly the setting lever, because the hole for the screw is so tight around the screw that there's no slack. It's just so finely machined. So it can be a bit fiddly. We're putting some grease on the sliding pinion and the winding pinion. And also at the back of the winding pinion, where it rubs on the main plate. And same thing with the stem. So really nothing out of the ordinary. Wow. Apart from this being a watch that is out of the ordinary. We talked about this before, but might be worth repeating. In general, we're using grease where parts rub against each other, like in the keyless works, where you have the setting lever rubbing against the yoke, for instance. You have the yoke spring rubbing against the yoke. In those instances, you put on grease, where you have rotating elements with high pressure. Like on the center wheel, for instance, you use D5 or HP 1300 or similar. Also on the cannon pinion. And where you have a higher rotational speed, you typically use 90-10. Alright, we're going to give the watch a little wind. So we can test the pallet fork flicking nicely. And then it's time for the balance. And that looks all right. Of course, sub-seconds or small seconds movements are also less complicated than central seconds movements. Because in a movement like this, you can simply extend the fourth wheel pivot through the plate on the other side, and then you have your seconds hand. Okay, we're going to give it a good wind and then see on the time grapher. Oh, that was easy. Kind of nice when I just have to put the watch back together, put in a couple of drops of oil and go have lunch. Alright, and then we're ready to look at the case, make sure that we can put the movement back in. And those who have followed this channel for a while or seen a few videos know that I'm not a big fan of polishing everything so it's brand new and shiny looking. Yes, I think you should make it look nice, but I think a 60-year-old watch shouldn't look like it was made yesterday. To me that feels fake. That's also just a matter of philosophy, but that's how I roll. So what we're using here is something called Never Dull. If you use a very soft cloth afterwards, you get a nice shine. And you don't take off barely any material, as you do when you polish. And that's really the main problem with polishing, the way I see it. that when you polish, you do remove material. Bad polishing could remove up to 1% of material. And it's not just the percentage that's interesting. Of course, if it's a watch made out of gold or platinum or something, that 1% might even be valuable. But even if it's plain old steel, that 1% is typically going to be in places that are visible. Places where you bump your watch into things, like doors and that kind of stuff. So basically you're going to remove parts of your watch that really define the watch, like the angles, the lugs, all those things. And once you polished it, the first thing you're going to do after putting it on is bump it again. Anyway, we're looking at the dial. The dial is, as I mentioned, actually in quite good condition, even though the first few shots of it didn't really make that too obvious. So we're just going to try to take off some dirt if we can and shine the indices a little bit. Now it's important to be aware that there's no magic trick for dials. There's no magic solution, anything that you can put a dial into and then it comes out squeaky clean and as new. It's always a big risk of removing the varnish and with it the printing. So on dials that have any kind of print, typically the lettering of the logo, maybe some information like chronometer, automatic, that kind of thing, then it's quite important that you don't rub on the lettering. And also don't use compressed air, that kind of thing. And while we've been talking too much, we got the dial back on the movement. I'm going to get the hands back on. On movements where we have sub-seconds, we're going to put the small seconds hands on first, so we don't risk messing up the other hands if they interfere with the seconds hand, or vice versa. For movements with the small seconds, it's also important to check that the hour hand and the small seconds hand don't interfere. That can happen quite easily, especially if the pivot on the fourth wheel is a little bit bent, which does happen quite frequently. And we're going to check, as we always do, that the hands are parallel to the dial, that they don't rub on anything. When casing this movement, there is a small pin on the movement that has to fit into the slot in the dial. That helps with aligning the movement, of course. And again, every time you have to use force on something in the watch, you're doing something wrong. So if you're trying to put the movement into the case and it just will not go, then check if there's a pin. the stem in place. We just have to put on the case back and find a new crystal. Sometimes in the bezel there's a little cutout to accommodate the stem or the crown. Be very sure to line those up, of course. I've seen listings on Chrono24 where you had a bezel that has a dent in it. Turns out it's actually the cutout for the crown. Okay, last thing is the case back, then we can try the watch on. Well, of course we need a strap, but we'll do that off camera. And there we have it. Ultra thin solid gold Vacheron Constantin with a caliber 1001. It's a beautiful watch, both inside and outside. Thanks for spending some of your valuable time watching this video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, then clicking like and subscribe will really help us. We'll be back shortly with another video. Until then, ta-ta.